Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Drees with the Daily Memphian, talking with Shelby County Commissioner Britney Thornton, and this is On the Record. We record Friday, January 27th, 2023. This is for a larger story in the Daily Memphian on efforts to develop affordable housing and new questions about the process for the sale and redistribution of property owned by the county because of delinquent property tax payments. Commissioner Thornton, this past Monday, the commission approved your proposal for a 3-month moratorium on all sales of tax delinquent properties owned by the county. Tell me about the larger issue for you behind this moratorium.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This issue has become surprisingly something I'm very, very passionate about. I really feel that the core issue here is just our land, short and simple, and the interest in our land and the opportunity that we have through, the acquisition of our land. So, for me, it's become apparent that there's a need for us to kind of stop and assess how our policies and procedures are allowing everyday Shelby Countyans to access that land. And I just think that it'll be a fruitful conversation across the board for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So over the next 3 months, what is the information you and other commissioners want to see specifically on these properties?
For sure. Well, we want definitely transparency to come back to this office for the policies and procedures to be defined and consistently applied. We want to feel confident that the leaders that we have in position to execute, the policies and procedures, that they are competent and that they have real estate experience that's needed to be able to execute the functions of this office. We also, I think this will be a push. And actually one that'll go back 2 administrations ago when we saw exemplary performance in this particular area, but to ensure that we have an outreach plan in place to get the information about how people utilize the land bank back into our neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. But before the vote, you disclosed that you have bought 18 parcels in these county sales before you were elected to the commission. What was your experience with this process?
Yeah, it's important. I said that we need to elect elected officials that have experience. And so in this particular area, I didn't request to be the chair of the delinquent tax property. So it's just interesting how life is just pushing me back into these places of experience. But, here I am chairing this committee with this experience, having successfully, navigated the land bank 18 times to secure these properties. So for me, coming back from graduate school and realizing that the housing stock in my home neighborhood was depleted, I had limited options just for the family that I've been birthed into. I just haven't come with inheritances and, deep pockets of money to tap into. So I had to get it how it was able to be got. So I saw, or someone actually educated me on the land bank in the neighborhood. And then I just started to with my passive income, decide that this was going to be a value for me. So as a private citizen, I have accumulated, 18 properties that I now have the luxury to figure out what to do with. And I just want people to be in the same opportunity. I realized early on that land acquisition was a value to me. And I think that coming from Orange Mound, that was something that was just taught, that home ownership, it's just always been a value that, has been instilled to me by my elders. But as I've come to 2023, I also realized that the time that we're living in now for every Shelby County, and it's important for us just to assess what is it that we want to have ownership of, and when is the right time for us to pursue that? And I would just say, if land is of interest to anyone, that now in this day and age is the time for people to figure out how to create their plans to acquire it. And so, we look to Nashville, we look to Atlanta, we look to Durham, we look to Detroit, and we see some trends that Memphis is trending towards. And I think that they have a story to tell. I know that there are a number of people who would want to have, the land that was in their family in Nashville, but now they're on the outskirts. And who knows when they'll have the opportunity again to reacquire that land. So in Orange Mound, every single day, I'm just hearing of people who are losing their home houses and, being foreclosed on. And it's very disheartening for me to see that. And I know I don't want that in my personal story. And I also don't want that for the future generations that will stem from me. So I think that this just a time for us to stop and reflect and figure out what it is that we desire as a people.
So what is the value of these parcels? Not their appraised value, but their value to the push for development, and specifically the development of affordable housing in some of the city's most blighted areas?
I love that question because there's so many layers to this conversation. We're talking about the acquisition part, but then there's the maintenance part, which is my reality. I now have to maintain 18 properties. And I know that, not activating those properties makes this just a burden, I don't think that many people should envy the acquisition because it definitely is a responsibility. But I think that beyond the, acquisition and maintenance, the process of disposal is interesting to me because the land bank has equipped people with land that they have not activated. So I actually want to go beyond this, after we finish this 90 days, I actually want to move into a conversation around emerging developers and just what does it look like for us to actually invest funds into activating the land that people own. You can imagine that if you just sit on land, it could be a community garden or it could be a 3-story, mixed use development. And I think that the process of how people activate their land for the best use of community is also a place that we need to entertain. So we have a lot of people who own land, they have visions for it, but for whatever reason, they haven't manifested it in years, decades. And that is also equally of interest to me. Now that falls outside of the purview of the land bank, but I do just want to kind of have people peep into the future to see how this conversation is going to be a conversation that I intend to build on over the course of my next 3 years and 8 months of service to Shelby County.
Mm-hmm. And you heard Cliff Norville, who's the director of the County Division of Public Works, which includes the land bank, and he basically told you all this past week that if you want the land bank to get into that, then you have to expand their duties, because right now, as it's written, their duties are basically to take this property and get it out the door and in the hands of someone else as quickly as they possibly can. So is this an expansion of the land bank, or is this something else besides the land bank?
So I think, I also heard that there were properties that have been, unprocessed within the land bank for over a year. For everyone listening, I've only been in position for 4 months. And so that also is indicative of poor performance. So in the context of what the land bank can do, the land bank has not been doing it. Okay. And that's just the short and simple of it. So we definitely want to get this land bank up and running to do what it is functioned to do. And then, like I said, 2 administrators ago, you had an administrator that under her leadership, and I'm referencing Dawn Kennard, she was in the neighborhoods educating constituents. And some of the people that were fired were actually those people who were out in the neighborhoods on behalf of the Shelby County Land Bank. So I will measure the land bank by what it has been able to do and question why those operations have, under new leadership, been unable to be executed on. And then beyond that, I do want people to hear me say that we will contemplate if there should be a reshaping of the scope of the functions of the land bank. I mean, to the extent that it's capable to fall under the land bank, let's do it. But I'm also willing to say this is where we draw the line in the roles and responsibilities of the land bank, and we pick up in, just greater capacity, a new effort that builds on where the land bank ends. So I'm curious to see, where do we draw the line? And then where do we need to continue to innovate to be able to meet the need? So I just let people know that for me, it's not just about acquiring land. I actually do care about the ultimate use of the land. And I'm trying to get a better understanding of whose responsibility does that need to fall under to be mindful of the use of the land?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of this seems to me, just from my perspective, not owning land or anything like that, this seems to be also about the nexus of nonprofits with developers when they're not one and the same entity. Should these parcels, these properties, be limited to nonprofits that in their structures have the ability to do development, to move dirt, build a house, get a loan, and all of that? Or is the nature of nonprofit work always going to be that nonprofits are going to be one part of it with developers?
I think that your questions are spot on. So I run a nonprofit. And so again, my personal experience, it allows me to approach these conversations differently. And someone asked me a question recently, it was actually my sister. She said, Brittany, if you die, what happens to Juice Orange Mound? And I thought it was such a great question because we have so many in this day and age, nonprofits that are run by visionary leaders. And so the more ambitious of such will acquire land. And I live in Orange Mound, so I see this every day. There's property that is not being fully utilized, that is entangled with nonprofit leaders, a board of which who has passed away. And, it's just the nonprofit entanglements are starting to manifest themselves. So I'm not of the opinion that just shipping our inventory to nonprofits is the exact solution. I do think that for the nonprofits who actually have the capacity to activate land to its best use, that they are great transfers. But I do realize that nonprofits have their own savviness and savage to how they're operating as well. And it's not always to the benefit of the neighborhood. So I think that we just need to be better at assessing, like the sensitivity of the time that we're living in now is just calling us not just to do things just to do them, but to do things with like conscious outcomes that we're trying to manifest. And if giving it to a nonprofit makes sense for its best use, then I say go for it. But if giving it to a nonprofit means that it's going to take away from an individual operator who could actually get it to its best use, then I'm all for us saying that the nonprofit conveyance was not the best route and that local neighborhood person doing their plan is the best for the community. So I really, in general, you're going to hear that I'm very much so for neighborhoods deciding what's best for neighborhoods. And I know that neighborhoods know whose hands will get this into the best use for community. So I think that that'll be an interesting also just byproduct of all these conversations, that we strengthen our neighborhood understanding of what it desires for itself. And I hope to see neighborhoods really start to take over down to the point of who is getting access to the land when it concerns the land bank.
All right. And the discussion has included concerns about out-of-town investors, not just on this specific issue about tax delinquent properties, but across the board on private property transfers in general across this city. And those investors could be capital groups from other parts of the country or folks who are just speculating about this. So what about developers who are from different parts of the city in a competitive bidding environment that includes bidders who live in the neighborhood, who live just down the street from where the property is? Is there a line to be drawn there?
I think that the conversation about out-of-town investors, like it's reached just kind of anecdotally this place of paranoia. So when I look at the numbers, and I've had a number of concerned constituents who are like, those out-of-town investors, like they're taking everything, which led me to go to the assessor, to go to the trustee to get, accurate information. So it seems like 1 in 5 of our properties are being sold to out-of-town investors. So that leads us to say when the transfers are happening, more likely than not, a local investor is actually the person. Mm-hmm. Now, at the neighborhood level, whether or not that person is from the neighborhood as an investor, that could be a question. And that's why I like to steep the conversations in neighborhoods. Like, I think that we should increase the number of neighborhood investors that are positioned to acquire land. And I know that that is a value for me. And to the extent that we within the law are able to do that, that's what I'm going to be pushing for, is that neighborhoods should be able to dictate how their land is acquired, particularly in this unique circumstance. Of course, the private market will allow whatever, an out-of-town investor wants to do. The highest, figure figure oftentimes wins. And so there would still be the general market that people can engage in. But this is a unique market. This is one where we get to kind of put some parameters on what redemption looks like and how we try to get these properties into new opportunities. So I'm looking to kind of explore what the land bank's potential is and lean into favoring the neighborhoods and their interests.
Right now, is the standard just, okay, this person or this entity bid the most for this property, and it's going to cover the back taxes? Is that what the standard is now for transferring these properties?
Another good question. I mean, I've only seen inconsistencies. I haven't seen a standard. That was one of the flags for me. At times we are paying the back taxes. At times that figure is something that just is so nominal that it doesn't make sense. At times there are nonprofit entities that get nominal conveyances. At times there are nonprofits that are paying, the back taxes. And I'm literally at this point pushed to just trying to interpret what the law says to be able to push, for us to create some type of policy that is consistent. There's one thing that the listeners should know, and that currently our land bank is operating very inconsistently. And when I see inconsistencies, I have to ask myself, when it deviates, who is it favoring? Remember, people think about 50 by 100-foot lots coming through the land bank, but we have large commercial properties that also are, being acquired through the land bank. So there's a lot of varying interests that come through the acquisition of land through the land bank. And we have to question that when we have people who are both within the office, terminated from the office, that say that there are inconsistent operations. To me, we have to stop to question that. It's beyond just a personnel issue. There's a policy and procedural breakdown that's happening within this office to allow for these inconsistencies. So to the best that I possibly can do, I want to help this office get itself back together so that we can ensure that everyday citizens feel like they have the best chance possible to compete with their neighborhood investors, their local investors, and out-of-town investors. Everyone should be able to know that the process at least is fair.
Mm-hmm. The Blight Authority of Memphis had 21 parcels across 2 resolutions on Monday that were both withdrawn. You're chairwoman of the committee, and I think you said that the Blight Authority withdrew both of those. Am I correct on that? And so are those going to be back as far as you're concerned? Because you have some suspicions about the Blight Authority in this.
I feel like some of my colleagues might have more suspicions. For me, I'm just trying to see how these things work together. The nonprofits play an essential role just in government. And I think that this is a great case of this particular nonprofit having to figure out how does it work both with the land bank, because it has, there's the conversations about it being quasi-governmental, and it's just not a regular operating nonprofit. It actually feels entitled by state law to do certain things that other nonprofits are not in practice to do. So I think for BAM is having to figure out what is its acquisition strategy to be able to sustain its organization. BAM has a budget. It has staff that it has to fund, just like the rest of nonprofits. It is a business, and that business has to have revenue. And so BAM is trying to figure out what is the revenue model that it wants. Now, for it, purchasing land at a cheaper cost is more beneficial to its model. And so it just has to figure out how is it going to acquire its land so that it can sustain the model to sustain the organization. So I get, the struggles that BAM is having, and particularly it's just really just at this time, the land, what does it mean for BAM to be able to come in over a neighborhood investor and just say, because of the functions of my organization, I get to take your land? Particularly when that neighborhood person, this is their sole access into building generational wealth for generations, and they just lost, the family home, that they want to continue to figure out how to keep. So the nuance is just here. 2023 is just going to be a year of nuance for us, and we just have to make sure that we have policies and procedures to allow us to lean into the nuance to benefit, for me, the everyday citizen of Shelby County. That's what matters most to me. I think that benefiting organizations is one way, level for us to hang our hat, but I would like to see us to be so granular that we actually produce policies and procedures that everyday Shelby Countyans feel like they at least have an opportunity.
All right. A final point. At some point during the committee discussion about BAM, you all got a briefing from the Blight Authority on the job it does, and as newly elected commissioners, you all are getting a whole lot of briefings on a whole lot of things. We should say since you took office in September. At some point during that briefing, from what I can gather, the folks with BAM said. Described the organization as essentially a middleman, and that didn't go over too well with several commissioners. Fair to say?
Fair to say.
So was that an accurate description of intent as far as you're concerned, or as you said, is BAM still figuring this out?
I think at some point, this ecosystem felt like we needed a BAM. And I think that BAM is in the process, they recently had a leadership transfer. They're just trying to figure out how they fit in this ecosystem. And I'm not ready at the point to say that, we don't need BAM. I just do think that we need to figure out how BAM is either needed or not needed and just be okay with that decision. I think that individual ownership is going to take away the need, particularly because you think like in your family, if you wanted something that you could not acquire, hopefully there are generations around you that could help you in that pursuit, whether it's a microloan from your family. Like, I think that we are in the place now where communities, and particularly Black communities, do have access, whether it be in direct or indirect ways, to more monies. And you see so many people operate independent of conventional ways to access capital. I know for me personally, I had to go do high interest loans to be able to close on some of my properties. I was not always bankable throughout the course of this. And though I didn't have a family to tap into, there's so many other ways that people are tapping into money in 2023. So I think that because of the access that people have to capital that is new, that is unconventional, like people are able to actually show up as players in ways that we just often have thought that they never would have had opportunity. And that's what's kind of messing up the game here. And so BAM is just in the middle of all of these new opportunities, newfound interests, and just our land. So I think it's just a fascinating breakdown. It's not, you won't hear me condemning BAM, but I do think that in all things, we need to just evaluate and figure out what is it that we need, what is it that we don't need, and just try to do that as thoughtful as possible.
Right. All right, that's where we will leave what is a very complex discussion with much more discussion to come on this. We have been talking with Shelby County Commissioner Britney Thornton. I'm Bill Dries, and this has been On the Record.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community. The Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.